The night Rebecca Lawrence stumbled into Verdi, Nevada was the darkest of her life. Her wagon broke down just as the sun was setting over the Sierra Nevada mountains, and her 6-month-old daughter Sarah's fever had risen so high that her tiny body burned to the touch. Rebecca had fled San Francisco with barely enough money for food, let alone enough to pay a doctor, and now her daughter's rattling cough echoed through the wagon like a death knell. It was 1876, and the promise of a new life in the Nevada silver mines where her brother worked had driven Rebecca to leave behind the painful memories of her husband's death. Now, with Sarah burning up in her arms and no money to her name, she wondered if she had made a fatal mistake. "Hold on, my sweet girl," Rebecca whispered, pressing her chapped lips to Sarah's forehead as she gathered her child closer to her chest. The baby's breathing came in short, ragged gasps. Rebecca had tried every home remedy she knew: willow bark tea, cool compresses, even the last of the expensive laudanum she'd brought from San Francisco, but nothing broke the fever that had gripped her daughter for 3 days now. With Sarah bundled against the autumn chill, Rebecca trudged toward the lights of Verdi, a small settlement nestled at the foot of the mountains. The moon cast long shadows as she made her way down the main street, her boots kicking up dust. Most businesses were closed at this hour, but a sliver of light shone from beneath the door of a building with a weathered sign reading, "Dr. Thomas Wilson, Physician." Rebecca shifted Sarah in her arms and knocked desperately at the door. Her knuckles had barely left the wood when it swung open, revealing a middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose and suspenders over his wrinkled shirt. "Dr. Wilson, please help us," Rebecca pleaded, her voice cracking. "My baby is very sick." The doctor's tired eyes softened as he took in the sight of the young mother and feverish child. Come in," he said, stepping aside. The doctor's office smelled of carbolic acid and herbs. He cleared space on an examination table and motioned for Rebecca to lay Sarah down. "How long has she been like this?" he asked, pressing a hand to Sarah's forehead. 3 days now. The fever won't break and her cough is getting worse," Rebecca explained, hovering nervously as the doctor examined her daughter. "Doctor." Wilson's face grew grave as he listened to Sarah's chest with his stethoscope. "Pneumonia, I'm afraid. Not uncommon in children her age, but certainly dangerous. She needs immediate treatment." Rebecca's heart sank. "How much will it cost?" she asked, already knowing she couldn't afford whatever amount he named. The doctor hesitated. $5 for the examination and another $5 for the medicine she'll need. Plus, I'll need to see her daily until she improves." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. $10 might as well have been 1,000. I don't have that much," she admitted, shame burning her cheeks. "I have exactly 87 cents. Dr. Wilson's expression darkened. "Mrs. Lawrence, Rebecca Lawrence, Mrs. Lawrence, I sympathize with your situation, but I cannot provide services without payment. I have my own expenses, supplies to purchase." "Please," Rebecca begged, tears streaming down her face. "She's all I have. I'll work it off cleaning, laundry, anything. I just cannot let my baby die." The bell above the door jangled, cutting through their conversation. Both turned to see a tall man silhouetted against the night sky, his broad shoulders nearly filling the doorframe. He stepped into the light, revealing a weather-beaten face beneath the brim of a dusty Stetson. "Everything all right in here, Doc?" the stranger asked, his voice deep and gravelly. Dr. Wilson sighed. "Just a difficult situation, Mr. Kent. This lady's baby is quite ill, but I'm afraid I'll cover it," the man said without hesitation, reaching into his vest pocket and pulling out a leather wallet. "Whatever she needs." Rebecca stared in disbelief as the stranger counted out $15 and placed them on the doctor's desk. "That should cover today and the next visit, I reckon," he said. I can't accept this," Rebecca stammered, even as relief flooded through her. "You don't even know us." The man turned to her fully, and Rebecca noticed his eyes were a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "Name's Rhett Kent. Now we're not strangers." He tipped his hat slightly. "And I know what it's like to need help and not have it come." Dr. Wilson, seemingly reinvigorated by the payment, moved to a cabinet and began gathering bottles. "This is very generous, Mr. Kent." "It's nothing," Rhett replied, then addressed Rebecca. "The little one going to be okay, Doc, with proper care and medicine, yes, but she'll need constant attention tonight. The fever must break by morning." Rebecca swallowed hard. "I'll stay with her, of course." "Where are you staying in town?" Dr. Wilson asked as he mixed a tincture in a small glass. Rebecca hesitated. "Our wagon broke down just outside town. We haven't secured lodging yet." Rhett frowned. "You can't take a sick baby back to a broken wagon in the night chill." "I'll make room for them here," Dr. Wilson offered, but Rhett shook his head. "Doc, you've got that old man with the broken hip in the back room already. I've got a room at the Silver Dollar. Mrs. Lawrence and her baby can have the bed. I'll take the chair." "Mr. Kent, I couldn't possibly. It's decided," Rhett said firmly, in a tone that suggested he wasn't accustomed to being refused. "Unless you'd prefer different accommodations, madam." Rebecca looked down at Sarah, who had begun to whimper in her feverish state. The idea of spending another night in the cold wagon with her sick child terrified her. "Thank you, Mr. Kent. Your kindness won't be forgotten." Dr. Wilson administered the medicine, a mixture that smelled of camphor and something bitter, which he helped Sarah swallow. "She'll need another dose in 4 hours. Keep her cool with damp cloths, but don't let her get chilled. If her breathing worsens or she has trouble waking, come get me immediately." Rebecca nodded, committing each instruction to memory as the doctor packed a small bundle of additional medicine and cloths. Rhett stood quietly by the door, his presence both imposing and reassuring. Once they were ready, Rhett led Rebecca through the quiet streets to the Silver Dollar Hotel, a 2-story building that, while not luxurious, appeared clean and well-maintained. The night clerk raised an eyebrow at the sight of Rhett returning with a woman and baby, but said nothing as they passed through the lobby. Rhett's room was simple: a bed, a washstand, a wooden chair, and a small table beneath a window that overlooked the main street. A kerosene lamp cast a warm glow over worn but clean furnishings. "Make yourself comfortable," Rhett said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "I'll fetch some fresh water for the compresses." Left alone, Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Sarah against her shoulder. The baby's breathing was still labored, but she seemed slightly more comfortable after the medicine. "What kind of man pays a doctor bill for strangers and gives up his bed?" Rebecca murmured to her daughter, bewildered by the day's turn of events. When Rhett returned with a pitcher of water and some clean rags, Rebecca was struck again by his size. He must have been over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work. Despite his rugged appearance, the stubbled jaw, the calloused hands, there was a gentleness to his movements as he set down the water and poured some into a basin. "If you'll dampen these cloths, I'll build up the fire a bit," he said, moving to the small stove in the corner of the room. "The nights get cold here." As Rebecca tended to Sarah with the cool compresses, Rhett added wood to the stove and adjusted the flue. The domestic routine felt oddly comfortable, despite the circumstances and the fact that they were complete strangers. "Why did you help us?" Rebecca asked finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Rhett remained by the stove, his back to her. "Because you needed it," he said simply. "Most people don't part with $15 so easily, especially for folks they don't know." He turned then, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. I've been in rough spots before, had people turn me away. I swore I wouldn't be the kind of man who does that to others. Rebecca nodded, accepting his answer even though she suspected there was more to it. Well, thank you. I don't know what would have happened without your help. Rhett pulled the chair closer to the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. Your husband not with you? He asked, then immediately raised a hand. Forgive me, that's not my business. My husband died, Rebecca said quietly, adjusting the compress on Sarah's forehead. Accident at the docks in San Francisco 6 months ago, right after Sarah was born. Rhett's expression softened. I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Lawrence. Please call me Rebecca. She managed a small smile. And you're Rhett Kent, the Good Samaritan of Verdi. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Just Rhett will do, and I'm no saint, just passing through on my way to a ranch north of here. Got work as a foreman starting next week. You're a cowboy then? Cattleman, tracker, sometimes scout for the army. I go where the work is. Rebecca nodded, understanding the nomadic life all too well. I'm headed to Silver City to stay with my brother. He's found work in the mines there and says I can keep house for him until I get on my feet. They fell into conversation as the hours passed, speaking in low voices so as not to disturb Sarah, who drifted in and out of fitful sleep. Rebecca learned that Rhett had fought for the Union during the war, then spent years driving cattle across the Western Territories. He spoke little of family or his past before the war, and Rebecca didn't press. When it came time for Sarah's next dose of medicine, Rhett helped Rebecca measure it correctly, his large hands surprisingly deft with the tiny dropper. You're good with children, Rebecca observed as Sarah took the medicine without much fuss. Had younger siblings, Rhett said cryptically, not elaborating further. As the night deepened, Rebecca's exhaustion caught up with her. She fought to keep her eyes open, determined to watch over Sarah, but found herself nodding off repeatedly. You should rest, Rhett said gently. I'll watch the little one. I promise to wake you if anything changes. Rebecca wanted to protest, but the weight of the past few days pressed down on her. You're sure? I'm sure. Sleep. Rebecca hesitated, then carefully placed Sarah in the middle of the bed, surrounding her with pillows so she wouldn't roll. She lay down beside her daughter, one hand resting protectively on the baby's chest to feel each breath. She meant to close her eyes for just a moment, but the next thing she knew, pale morning light was filtering through the window. Rebecca sat up with a start, immediately reaching for Sarah. The baby was still asleep, but her skin was cooler to the touch, her breathing easier. The racking cough that had terrified Rebecca for days had subsided to occasional soft whimpers. Rhett was where she had last seen him, sitting in the chair by the bed. His eyes were open, watching them both with a mixture of concern and something else Rebecca couldn't quite name. Her fever broke about 2 hours ago, he said quietly. She's been sleeping peacefully since. Relief washed over Rebecca in a wave so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, brushing a gentle hand over Sarah's downy head. Thank you for staying awake, for watching over her. Rhett shrugged, but his eyes were kind. It was no hardship. Rebecca knew better. The shadows under his eyes spoke of his vigil, and she saw how he shifted stiffly in the chair, his body protesting the long night without rest. You should sleep now, she said. I can take Sarah to see the doctor and come back later. I'll come with you, Rhett insisted, rising from the chair. After we see the doctor, we should look at your wagon. Can't have you stranded here. Rebecca wanted to argue that he had already done more than enough, but the genuine concern in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she nodded gratefully. That would be very kind. After Sarah woke, seemingly more alert and comfortable than she had been in days, Rebecca freshened up as best she could with the basin water. She felt acutely aware of her rumpled dress and disheveled hair, especially when Rhett returned from a quick trip downstairs with a tray bearing bread, cheese, and hot coffee. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the small table. The simple breakfast was the best thing Rebecca had tasted in days. Even Sarah seemed interested in a small piece of softened bread, which Rebecca took as a very good sign. Dr. Wilson was pleased with Sarah's improvement when they visited his office later that morning. "The fever breaking is an excellent sign," he said, listening to the baby's chest. "Her lungs are still congested, but the medicine is working. Continue with the doses for at least 3 more days." Rebecca nodded, relief making her light-headed. "Thank you, doctor." "And thank you, Mr. Kent," the doctor added, giving Rhett an appraising look. "Your intervention was timely indeed." Rhett merely nodded, his hat in his hands. "Glad the little one's on the mend." After leaving the doctor's office, they walked to the edge of town where Rebecca's wagon sat forlornly by the side of the road. Rhett examined the broken axle with a practiced eye. "This can be fixed," he announced after a thorough inspection. "But it'll take some special tools and a new piece of wood. The blacksmith in town should be able to help." "How much will it cost?" Rebecca asked warily. Rhett straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. "Let me worry about that." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "You've already spent enough on us. I need to know what I'm facing." He studied her for a long moment, respect flickering in his eyes. "Probably $3 for materials, plus the blacksmith's labor." Rebecca's heart sank. Even if she sold some of her meager possessions, she wouldn't come close to that amount. "I have some things I could sell," she began, but Rhett shook his head. "I have a proposition," he said. "I'm heading north to the Carson Valley in a few days. Silver City isn't far out of my way. If you're willing to wait until Sarah's stronger, I could escort you both. We can fix the wagon in the meantime." Rebecca hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. "Why would you do that? You've already done so much." Rhett looked away, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Maybe I'm not in a hurry to be alone again," he said finally, the admission seeming to cost him something. "Or maybe I just want to make sure that little girl gets where she needs to go safely." There was something in his voice, a hint of old pain, that resonated with Rebecca. She looked down at Sarah, who was watching Rhett with curious eyes, one tiny hand reaching toward him. "I think we'd be glad of the company," Rebecca said softly, and so it was decided. Rhett arranged for the wagon repairs and secured a room for Rebecca and Sarah at the boarding house while they waited for the baby to recover fully. He took a room there as well, though he spent most of his days helping around town to earn extra money and his evenings checking on Rebecca and Sarah. By the 3rd day, Sarah was sitting up, her bright eyes and grabby hands a far cry from the listless, feverish baby of just a few days before. Rebecca watched in amazement as the naturally reserved Rhett made silly faces to elicit giggles from her daughter. "She likes you," Rebecca observed as Sarah clutched Rhett's finger in her tiny fist. "Smart kid," Rhett replied with a rare smile that transformed his face, erasing years of hardship in an instant. Rebecca found herself looking forward to his visits, to the quiet conversations they shared after Sarah had fallen asleep. Rhett told her stories of the places he'd seen, the vastness of the Texas plains, the red rock canyons of Arizona Territory, the lush valleys of California. Rebecca shared memories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west with her husband, and her dreams for Sarah's future. "I want her to have choices," Rebecca confided one evening, "to be strong and independent, not at the mercy of circumstances like I've been." Rhett nodded thoughtfully. "She will be. She's got a strong mother to show her the way." The compliment warmed Rebecca in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. On the 5th day, The wagon was ready, and Sarah was well enough to travel. Rebecca packed her belongings while Rhett loaded supplies. He had purchased extra blankets for the colder mountain nights, preserved food for the journey, and even a small rag doll for Sarah. "You shouldn't have," Rebecca protested when she saw the doll, but her objection lacked conviction. The joy on Sarah's face as she clutched the toy was worth any price. "Every little girl should have a doll," Rhett said simply, and again Rebecca sensed there was more to his story than he revealed. They left Verdi early the next morning, with Rhett driving the wagon and Rebecca sitting beside him, Sarah secure in her lap. The autumn air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue above the pine-covered mountains. Rebecca couldn't help but feel a flicker of optimism despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. "Tell me about your brother," Rhett said as they followed the winding road that would take them east and then north toward Silver City. "Henry is older than me by 5 years. He came west before I did, tried his luck in the goldfields first, then settled into mining silver. He's a good man, just a bit set in his ways." Rebecca smiled fondly. "He wasn't thrilled when I married James, thought I was too young at 18, but he came around eventually. After James died, he insisted I join him rather than struggle alone in San Francisco." "Sounds like a man who cares for his family," Rhett observed. "He does," Rebecca agreed, "though I'm not sure how he'll feel about having a baby in his bachelor quarters. That's why I intend to find my own place as soon as possible." Rhett glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "What will you do for work?" "Whatever I can find. I'm a fair seamstress and I've done laundry, cooking, cleaning. I'm not afraid of hard work." "I believe that," Rhett said, his voice warm with admiration. They made good progress that first day, stopping in the afternoon beside a clear stream to rest the horses and prepare a simple meal. Rebecca watched as Rhett built a small fire with practiced efficiency, then set water to boil for coffee. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked, bouncing Sarah on her knee. "Necessity," Rhett replied, arranging stones around the fire. "A man traveling alone either learns or goes hungry." "Have you always been alone?" The question slipped out before Rebecca could stop it. Rhett was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "No, not always." He didn't elaborate, and Rebecca didn't press. They ate their meal in companionable silence, watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountains. That night, they camped beneath a stand of pine trees. Rhett insisted that Rebecca and Sarah take the wagon while he slept outside beside the fire. Rebecca protested weakly, but secretly she was grateful for the privacy and comfort of the wagon bed. As she settled Sarah for the night, she peered through the canvas flap to where Rhett sat by the fire, his profile etched in gold by the flames. There was a solidity to him, a steadiness that Rebecca found increasingly comforting. The journey to Silver City would take several days, following the route through the Carson Valley and then northeast into mining country. The scenery changed gradually, the lush pine forests giving way to more arid landscapes dotted with sagebrush and juniper. On the third day of travel, they encountered a group of miners heading west, rough-looking men with beards and weathered faces. Rebecca clutched Sarah closer as the men approached their campsite, but Rhett stood to greet them with one hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. The miners proved friendly enough, sharing news of the road ahead and the conditions in Silver City. "Mines are hiring," one grizzled older man told them, "if you're heading that way looking for work." "My brother's already employed there," Rebecca explained. "Henry Lewis. Do you know him by chance?" The miners exchanged glances. "Lewis, tall fellow, reddish beard," one asked. Rebecca nodded eagerly. "That's him." "Good man," the miner said with a nod. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's a hard worker. Had some trouble with his leg last month, mining accident, but he's back at it now." Rebecca's smile faltered. "An accident? He didn't mention that in his letters." "Wasn't too serious," the miner assured her. "Caught between some timbers. He limps a bit now, but he's managing." After the miners continued on their way, Rebecca sat quietly by the fire, her mind racing. Why wouldn't he tell me about being injured? She wondered aloud. "Men can be stubborn about such things," Rhett said, stirring the pot of stew he was preparing. "Didn't want to worry you, most likely. But what if he's worse off than they said? What if he can't work? He's expecting me to depend on him, but what if he needs care himself?" Rhett placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, steadying her rising panic. "One step at a time, Rebecca. We'll get to Silver City and assess the situation then." His calm pragmatism helped settle her fears, and by the time they ate dinner, Rebecca had resolved to prepare for whatever awaited in Silver City. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside her in the wagon, Rebecca found herself wondering what would happen when they reached their destination. Would Rhett simply continue north to his new job? The thought left her with an unexpected hollow feeling. The next day brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a chill wind whipped across the open country. By mid-afternoon, the first fat raindrops began to fall. "We need to find shelter," Rhett called over the rising wind. "There's a way station about 3 miles ahead if I remember correctly." He urged the horses to a faster pace as the rain intensified. Rebecca held Sarah close, shielding her from the cold drops that found their way through the canvas cover. The way station appeared like a mirage through the curtain of rain, a sturdy log building with smoke rising from the chimney. Several other wagons and horses were already gathered in the yard, their owners clearly having made the same decision to seek shelter from the storm. Inside, the station was crowded but warm. A large fireplace dominated one wall, and rough wooden tables filled the main room. The station keeper, a barrel-chested man with an impressive mustache, nodded at their entrance. "Just in time," he said. "Storm's picking up something fierce. Got one private room left, but it'll cost you extra." "We'll take it," Rhett said without hesitation, placing coins on the counter. The room was small, barely fitting a narrow bed and a chair, but it was clean and, most importantly, dry. Rebecca settled Sarah on the bed while Rhett brought in their essential belongings from the wagon. "You should stay here with Sarah," he said. "I'll sleep in the common room with the other travelers." Rebecca shook her head. "That's ridiculous. The bed is small, but it will fit all 3 of us if Sarah sleeps between us." When Rhett hesitated, she added, "We've traveled together for days now. I trust you, Rhett." Something flickered in his eyes at her words, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. "If you're sure," he said finally. The arrangement was awkward at first, with both adults lying rigidly to maintain proper distance while Sarah slumbered peacefully between them. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the small window and thunder rumbling in the distance. "Thank you," Rebecca said softly into the darkness, "for everything you've done for us." "You don't need to keep thanking me," Rhett replied, his voice equally quiet. "Yes, I do. You saved my daughter's life. You've given up your time, your money, your comfort. Why? The truth this time." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of the rain and Sarah's gentle breathing. "I had a family once," Rhett said finally, the words coming slowly as if extracted at great cost. "A wife, Emma, and a daughter, Mary. They both took sick with influenza in '68. I was away driving cattle to market. By the time I got the message and made it back to our homestead in Colorado, they were already gone." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "Oh, Rhett, I'm so sorry." "Mary was just about Sarah's age," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "When I saw you standing there in the doctor's office with your baby sick and no one to help you, I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let it happen again." Rebecca reached across Sarah's sleeping form, finding Rhett's hand in the darkness. She squeezed it gently, offering what comfort she could. "You're a good man, Rhett Kent." He didn't pull his hand away, and they fell asleep like that, connected by the touch of their fingers and the shared warmth of the child between them. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind puddles and a fresh, clean scent in the air. They continued their journey, the landscape growing more rugged as they approached mining country. Outcroppings of rock punctuated the hillsides, and occasionally they passed the entrance to a mine shaft or a cluster of rough cabins where miners lived. Silver City appeared on the afternoon of the 6th day, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with mine entrances visible on the surrounding hillsides. It was larger than Rebecca had imagined, with several stores, a hotel, saloons, and even a small church perched on a rise overlooking the town. "You know where your brother lives?" Rhett asked as they drove slowly down the main street, attracting curious glances from passers-by. Rebecca pulled out a letter from her pocket. "He said his cabin is on the east side of town, near the Silver Bell mine. He works there as a foreman now." They asked directions at the general store and were pointed toward a cluster of cabins about a quarter-mile from the main part of town. Rebecca's heart beat faster as they approached, a mixture of anticipation and anxiety making her hands tremble slightly. Henry's cabin was easy to identify from his description, the second one along the path, with a small vegetable garden to one side. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting he was home. Rhett halted the wagon and jumped down to help Rebecca and Sarah descend. Just as her feet touched the ground, the cabin door opened, and a tall man with a reddish beard appeared, leaning heavily on a walking stick. "Becky." He called, his face registering shock. "Is that really you, Henry?" Rebecca rushed forward, Sarah in her arms. "Yes, it's me. And this is your niece, Sarah." Henry embraced her awkwardly, mindful of the baby between them. "I wasn't expecting you for another week at least," he said, his eyes moving from Rebecca to Rhett, who stood a respectful distance away. "And who's this?" "This is Rhett Kent," Rebecca said, gesturing for Rhett to join them. "He's been escorting us from Verdi. Sarah was very ill and he helped us when we needed it most." Henry extended his hand to Rhett. "I'm in your debt then, Mr. Kent. Thank you for bringing my sister and niece safely to me." Rhett shook Henry's hand firmly. "It was my pleasure, Mr. Lewis." His eyes moved to Henry's walking stick. "We heard you had an accident," Henry grimaced. "Crushed my knee between support timbers. Doctor says it will heal eventually, but I'll likely always have the limp." He gestured toward the cabin. "Please come inside. You must be tired from your journey." The interior of the cabin was spare but neat, a main room that served as kitchen and living area, with two small bedrooms leading off it. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, and the smell of coffee filled the air. "It's not much," Henry said apologetically to Rebecca, "but there's room for you and the little one in the second bedroom. I've been using it for storage, but I can clear it out." Rebecca nodded, but her eyes noted the difficulty with which Henry moved around the cabin. The miners hadn't exaggerated his injury. His entire leg seemed stiff, and pain flickered across his face with each step. They shared a simple meal together, during which Henry asked about their journey and Rebecca filled him in on the events in Verdi. Rhett said little, but his eyes frequently moved to Henry's injured leg with a thoughtful expression. As evening approached, Rhett rose to take his leave. "I should find lodging in town for the night," he said. "I'll head north in the morning." Rebecca felt a pang at his words. She walked with him to the door, stepping outside onto the small porch while Henry remained inside with Sarah. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "You don't need to," Rhett replied, his hat in his hands. "Knowing you and Sarah are safe is enough." Rebecca studied his face in the fading light, memorizing the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw. Will you write to let us know you arrived safely at your new position?" A small smile touched his lips. "If you'd like that, yes." "I would." They stood in silence for a moment, the space between them filled with unspoken words. Finally, Rhett placed his hat on his head and stepped back. "Goodbye, Rebecca. Take care of that little girl." "Goodbye, Rhett." She watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the gathering darkness. Only when he was completely out of sight did she turn and go back inside. Henry was sitting by the fire, Sarah asleep in his arms. He looked up as Rebecca entered, his expression knowing. "He seems like a good man," he said quietly. "He is," Rebecca replied, sitting opposite her brother. "Henry, why didn't you tell me how bad your injury was?" Henry sighed. "I didn't want to worry you, and I didn't want you to change your mind about coming." "Change my mind? Why would I?" "Because I'm not in a position to help you as much as I promised," he admitted. "The mine keeps me on as foreman because I know the operations better than anyone, but I can't go underground anymore. My pay is reduced, and the doctor bills have eaten into my savings." Rebecca felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can offer you a roof, but not much else right now. I'm sorry, Becky. I wanted to do more." Rebecca reached over and squeezed his hand. "Don't apologize, we'll manage." But privately, she wondered how she would support herself and Sarah if Henry could barely support himself. The next few days were a blur of activity as Rebecca settled into the cabin, arranged the small bedroom to accommodate her and Sarah, and began to learn the rhythms of Silver City. Henry introduced her to neighbors and showed her where to find the best prices on necessities at the general store. But reality quickly set in. Henry's injury meant he needed help with many basic tasks, from carrying firewood to preparing meals. Rather than being able to focus on finding work, Rebecca found herself essentially running the household. A week after their arrival, Rebecca sat at the small table, tallying their combined resources on a scrap of paper. The numbers were grim. Even with careful management, they would struggle to make it through the winter. "I need to find work," she told Henry over breakfast the next morning. "Something I can do while caring for Sarah." Henry frowned. "The mining town's no place for a respectable woman to work, Becky. The laundry and the hotel employ women, but the hours are long, and they won't let you bring a baby." "There must be something," Rebecca insisted. "Perhaps sewing or taking in washing from home." Henry shook his head doubtfully. "Most miners send their laundry to the Chinese washhouse." "As for sewing, maybe, but it won't bring in much." Rebecca's spirits sank, but she refused to give in to despair. That afternoon, she bundled up Sarah and walked into town, determined to explore every possibility. The main street was busy with miners coming off their shifts, supply wagons making deliveries, and the general bustle of commerce. Rebecca visited the general store first, inquiring if they needed help, but the owner's wife handled all the work there. Next, she tried the hotel, but as Henry had predicted, they weren't interested in an employee who needed to bring a child to work. The laundry was the same story. Discouraged but not defeated, Rebecca headed back toward Henry's cabin as the sun began to set. She was passing the Silver Dollar Saloon when the door swung open and a familiar figure emerged. "Rebecca," she stopped in her tracks, hardly believing her eyes. "Rhett, what are you doing here? I thought you'd be halfway to Carson Valley by now." Rhett stepped fully into the street, his expression a mixture of surprise and something that looked like relief. "I was delayed, Had some business to attend to here first. Business? In Silver City, he nodded, glancing back at the saloon. I was just talking with the owner about a proposition. What are you doing in town with Sarah so late? Rebecca explained her unsuccessful job search, trying to keep the discouragement from her voice. It's more difficult than I expected, she admitted. Rhett listened intently, his brow furrowing. Your brother's leg is worse than he let on, isn't it? Yes, he can work as the mine foreman, but he needs help at home. I'm happy to provide that, of course, but we need more income. She shifted Sarah to her other arm. But I'll figure something out, I always do. Rhett seemed to make a decision. Come with me, he said. There's someone I want you to meet. Curious. Rebecca followed him back into the Silver Dollar Saloon. She hesitated at the entrance, aware that respectable women didn't typically enter such establishments, but Rhett assured her it was acceptable this early in the evening. The saloon was relatively quiet, with only a few customers at the bar and a card game in progress at one table. Rhett led Rebecca to a man polishing glasses behind the bar, a stout, middle-aged fellow with a friendly face. Mr. Hayes, this is Mrs. Rebecca Lawrence, the lady I was telling you about, Rhett said. Rebecca, this is Daniel Hayes, owner of the Silver Dollar. Mr. Hayes extended a hand, which Rebecca shook awkwardly while balancing Sarah. Pleased to meet you, madam. Your friend here speaks very highly of you. Rebecca glanced at Rhett in confusion. You were talking about me. Mr. Hayes has a situation you might be interested in, Rhett explained. Tell her, Daniel. The saloon owner leaned forward on the bar. I own this establishment and the building next door, which used to be a restaurant. My wife ran it until she passed last spring. I've been wanting to reopen it, but I need someone to manage it, plan menus, cook, serve customers. My regular business here keeps me too busy. Rebecca's pulse quickened. And you're offering me this position? Mr. Kent suggested you might be the right person, said you're hardworking and resourceful. I can provide the space and initial supplies. We'd split the profits 70% to you, 30% to me to cover the building and utilities. And Sarah? Rebecca asked, glancing down at her daughter. There's a small apartment above the restaurant. It would be yours as part of the arrangement. You could have the baby with you, and when she's napping, she'd be just upstairs. Rebecca's mind raced with possibilities. It seemed too good to be true. Why would you offer this to a stranger on another stranger's recommendation? Mr. Hayes chuckled. First, Rhett Kent isn't exactly a stranger to me. We go back some years. Second, good help is hard to find in a mining town. And third, I reckon a place serving decent, home-cooked meals would do well here. Miners get tired of saloon food and their own poor cooking. Rebecca looked at Rhett, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. You arranged this. I merely mentioned that I knew someone with the right skills who needed an opportunity, he said modestly. Mr. Hayes gave them some privacy to discuss the offer, moving to serve a customer at the other end of the bar. Rebecca turned fully to Rhett, her emotions a tumult of gratitude, confusion, and hope. Why did you stay in Silver City? She asked directly. Was it to do this for me? Rhett hesitated, then nodded. Partly. After meeting your brother and seeing his condition, I was concerned about your situation. The ranch job can wait a few days. But why go to such lengths? You've already done so much. Rhett's eyes held her steadily. Because in the days we traveled together, I came to care about what happens to you and Sarah. Is that so hard to believe? Rebecca felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the crowded saloon. No, she said softly. It's not hard to believe at all. She accepted Mr. Hayes's offer on the spot. The restaurant would need cleaning and some repairs, but it could be ready to open within 2 weeks. Mr. Hayes agreed to advance her enough money for initial supplies and to cover her living expenses, until the business was generating income. When Rebecca told Henry about the opportunity that evening, he was initially skeptical but came around when he understood the arrangement. "Sounds like this Mr. Kent went out of his way to help you get established," he observed with a knowing look. "He's a good man," Rebecca said simply. "And he's still in town?" Henry asked casually. "For another day or two," he said. "He has a job waiting in Carson Valley." Henry nodded thoughtfully but said nothing more on the subject. The next morning, Rebecca met Rhett at the restaurant building to begin assessing what needed to be done. The space had been closed for months, but was in good condition overall, a large main room with tables and chairs stacked against one wall, a serviceable kitchen with a large stove and ample counter space, and a small apartment upstairs consisting of a bedroom, a sitting area, and a tiny washroom. "This is perfect," Rebecca said, walking through the rooms with growing excitement. "I can't believe Mr. Hayes is willing to take a chance on me." "He's a smart businessman," Rhett replied, testing a loose floorboard with his boot. "He knows a good opportunity when he sees one." They spent the day making lists of needed repairs and supplies. Rhett fixed the loose boards, repaired a leaky pipe under the sink, and helped Rebecca move furniture back into place. By late afternoon, the restaurant was beginning to look like a viable business again. As they worked side by side, Rebecca couldn't help but notice how natural it felt to be with Rhett. They developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs and moving around each other comfortably in the small space. Sarah seemed equally content, watching them from a makeshift bed Rebecca had created from cushions in the corner. She babbled happily when Rhett made funny faces at her during breaks, and cried for him to pick her up when he passed too close without acknowledging her. "She's quite attached to you," Rebecca observed as Rhett bounced Sarah on his knee, the baby's giggles filling the room. "Smart kid," Rhett said, repeating his comment from days before, but his eyes were soft as he looked at the child. That evening, after Rhett walked Rebecca and Sarah back to Henry's cabin, he lingered on the porch. "I should head out tomorrow," he said, regret evident in his voice. "I've delayed long enough." Rebecca felt a sharp pang of loss. "Of course, you have commitments." She tried to smile. "Will you visit if you're ever passing through Silver City again? Count on it," he promised. "And I'll write like I said I would. I'd like that." Rebecca hesitated, then added impulsively, "Thank you for changing our lives, Rhett, not just in Verdi but here too." "You're changing your own life, Rebecca. I just opened a door." The next morning, Rebecca rose early, intending to see Rhett off. But when she reached the small hotel where he had been staying, she was told he had already checked out and departed. Disappointment washed over her as she walked back to Henry's cabin with Sarah. She had wanted to say a proper goodbye, to see his face one more time. Instead, she would have to content herself with memories and the promise of letters. Life moved forward at a surprising pace after that. The restaurant, which Rebecca named the Home Table, opened 2 weeks later. She served simple, hearty meals 3 times a day: breakfast for miners heading to early shifts, lunch for townspeople, and dinner for those seeking something better than saloon fare. Business was slow at first, but word spread quickly about the quality of Rebecca's cooking and the warm atmosphere she created. Within a month, she had to hire a young girl to help serve during busy periods. The apartment above the restaurant became a comfortable home for Rebecca and Sarah. Henry visited often, his leg gradually improving with consistent rest and care. He even began helping out occasionally, especially in the evenings when the restaurant was busiest. True to his word, Rhett wrote. His first letter arrived 3 weeks after he left, a brief but warm account of his arrival at the ranch in Carson Valley and the work he had found there. Rebecca read it so many times the paper began to wear thin at the folds. She wrote back, describing the restaurant's opening and Sarah's latest developments, her first tooth, her attempts at crawling. Rebecca found herself sharing more than just news, writing about her hopes for the future and her gratitude for the present. Their correspondence continued through the autumn and into winter. Each letter from Rhett revealed a little more about the man, his dry humor, his thoughtful observations about the world around him, his growing attachment to both Rebecca and Sarah, despite the distance between them. December brought heavy snows to Silver City, but the home table remained busy. Miners appreciated a warm place to eat when the temperature dropped, and Rebecca's hearty stews and freshly baked bread became famous throughout the camp. On Christmas Eve, Rebecca closed the restaurant early to celebrate with Henry and a few friends they had made in town. Sarah, now nearly 10 months old, was the center of attention, charming everyone with her attempts to stand and her enthusiastic babbling. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Rebecca found herself standing by the window, watching snow fall softly in the glow of the street lamps. Sarah had long since fallen asleep, and Henry was dozing by the fire. A movement in the street caught her eye, a tall figure on horseback, snow dusting the brim of his hat and the shoulders of his heavy coat. Rebecca's heart leapt as the rider dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post in front of the restaurant. She opened the door before he could knock, letting in a swirl of snowflakes and cold air. Rhett, he stood there, his face reddened from the cold, a small package in his gloved hands. "Merry Christmas, Rebecca," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Rebecca pulled him inside, hardly believing he was real. "What are you doing here? Your last letter said you couldn't get away from the ranch." "I couldn't until yesterday," he explained, stamping snow from his boots. "The owner's son arrived to take over for the holidays. I rode straight through, wanted to surprise you." Henry had awakened at the commotion and rose from his chair, grinning broadly. "Kent, good to see you, man. Come in, warm yourself." The three adults sat around the fire, speaking in low voices to avoid waking Sarah. Rhett explained that he had secured permission for an extended visit 2 weeks before he needed to return to the ranch. 2 weeks, Rebecca repeated, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "That's wonderful." "I brought something for Sarah," Rhett said, holding out the small package he had carried in. "For Christmas." Rebecca accepted it with a smile. "She'll open it tomorrow morning. She's quite adept at tearing paper now." As the evening grew late, Henry tactfully announced he was heading back to his cabin. "Rhett, you're welcome to my room here tonight," he offered. "No sense trudging through the snow to the hotel at this hour." After Henry departed, Rebecca and Rhett sat together on the small sofa, the fire crackling before them. The comfortable silence between them was new yet familiar, like returning to a place long missed. "I've thought about you every day," Rhett confessed finally. "About both of you." Rebecca met his gaze. "We've thought about you too. Sarah asks for Rhett when I read your letters. She remembers me." His voice held wonder. "Of course she does. You're important to her." Rebecca paused, gathering her courage. "To both of us." Rhett reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "When I left Verdi with you and Sarah, I thought I was just doing a good deed, helping a woman and child in need. I never expected to find a new purpose." "What do you mean?" "All these years, I've been running from memories, from attachment, from the pain of loss. But being with you and Sarah, it made me remember what it feels like to be part of something, to care deeply again." Rebecca's heart thundered in her chest. "And that's why you came back, because you care." "I came back because I realized I love you," Rhett said simply. "Both of you. I don't want to be apart anymore." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and fragile. Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. "I was afraid to hope," she whispered. afraid you might feel obligated because of how we met, because of what you did for us." "This isn't obligation," Rhett assured her, his voice firm. "This is choice. My choice if you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, Rebecca leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with months of longing and newfound certainty. When they parted, Rebecca rested her forehead against his. "I love you too, Rhett Kent, and I think our lives have been pointing toward each other from the moment you walked into that doctor's office in Verdi." Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the world outside transformed into a glittering wonderland of snow. Sarah woke early, as babies do, and Rebecca brought her into the main room where Rhett was already stoking the fire. The baby's eyes widened at the sight of him, and she lunged forward in Rebecca's arms, reaching for him with a delighted squeal. "Rhett! Rhett!" Rhett took her with a laugh, swinging her gently in the air before settling her on his hip. "Merry Christmas, little one, I've missed you." They spent the morning in domestic tranquility sharing breakfast, watching Sarah delight in the small wooden horse Rhett had brought her, and simply enjoying being together. Later, when they joined Henry and a few friends for Christmas dinner, no one seemed surprised to see Rhett at Rebecca's side, his arm occasionally slipping around her waist, his eyes rarely leaving her face. It was as if everyone had been expecting this development long before Rebecca and Rhett themselves had recognized it. The 2 weeks of Rhett's visit passed in a blur of happiness. He helped at the restaurant, charming customers with his stories and surprisingly deft handling of the busy dinner service. He fixed things around the building that Rebecca hadn't even realized needed repair, and spent hours playing with Sarah, who followed him adoringly. Most evenings after the restaurant closed and Sarah was asleep, Rebecca and Rhett would sit together by the fire, talking about their pasts, their present happiness, and tentatively, their future. "I've been thinking," Rhett said one such evening, 5 days before he was due to return to the ranch. "The owner of the place where I'm working is getting older. He's mentioned selling parcels of his land to trusted hands who want to settle down." Rebecca's breath caught. "Are you considering buying land?" "I am. There's a nice section with good water access, enough grazing land for a modest herd, and a view of the mountains that reminds me of the spot where we camped that first night on the trail." "It sounds beautiful." "It is. It would be a place to build something permanent, a home." He took her hand. "I'm asking if you and Sarah would consider coming with me when I go back. Not right away, you've built something wonderful here with the restaurant, but maybe in the spring when the roads are clear." Rebecca looked into his eyes, seeing the future he was offering not just security or comfort but partnership, family, love. "Are you proposing, Rhett Kent?" A smile spread across his face. "I believe I am, Rebecca Lawrence. Not very eloquently, perhaps, but with all my heart." "Then my answer is yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes to building a home with you, yes to becoming your wife, yes to giving Sarah a father who already loves her." Their kiss sealed the promise, and when they parted, Rebecca saw in Rhett's eyes the same joy and certainty she felt in her own heart. The next morning, they shared their news with Henry, who embraced them both with genuine happiness. "I had a feeling about you two from the start," he admitted. "And I couldn't wish for a better brother-in-law." They decided to marry before Rhett returned to the ranch. It would be a simple ceremony at the small church in Silver City, with Henry giving Rebecca away and Sarah serving as an unconventional flower girl in her mother's arms. Word of the engagement spread quickly through the tight-knit community. Customers at the home table offered congratulations, and several of the women in town insisted on helping with preparations for the small celebration that would follow the ceremony. Even Mr. Hayes, the saloon owner who had given Rebecca her start, announced he would close the silver dollar early on the wedding day so he and his staff could attend. "It's not every day we get to see the beginning of a love story we helped write," he said with a wink. 3 days before Rhett was due to leave, they were married in the late afternoon as winter sunshine streamed through the church's simple stained glass windows. Rebecca wore a dress of deep blue that Henry had insisted on purchasing as his gift, with Sarah in a matching ribbon. Rhett, standing tall and straight in a new shirt and his best vest, watched Rebecca walk toward him with an expression of such open adoration that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rhett gathered both Rebecca and Sarah into his embrace, creating a circle of family that had seemed impossible just months before. The celebration afterward was joyous music from a miner who played fiddle, dancing in the cleared space of the home table, and enough food and drink to satisfy even the hungriest guests. Sarah was passed from arm to arm, adored by everyone, until she finally fell asleep on Henry's shoulder as the evening wore on, when the last guests had departed, and Sarah was tucked safely in her bed. Rebecca and Rhett stood together in the small apartment that was now their temporary home. "Mrs. Kent," Rhett said softly, drawing her close. "I like the sound of that." "As do I, Mr. Kent," Rebecca replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Though I never imagined when you paid that doctor bill in Verdi that I'd end up with your name." "I knew," Rhett admitted with a smile. "Not consciously, perhaps, but somewhere deep inside. I think I knew you were meant to be mine from that first moment." Their life together began in earnest that night, with promises whispered in the darkness and plans laid for their future. 2 days later, Rhett reluctantly departed for Carson Valley, but with the promise to return in 6 weeks to help Rebecca and Sarah prepare for their move. The winter passed in a flurry of activity. Rebecca trained a young woman from town to take over the home table, transferring her recipes and the goodwill she had built with customers. Mr. Hayes was sorry to see her go, but delighted by the arrangement that would keep the restaurant open and still provide him with a share of the profits. Henry's leg continued to improve, and by February he was walking with only a slight limp. He had been offered a promotion at the mine, a position managing operations that would keep him above ground permanently and increase his pay substantially. "You don't have to worry about me, Becky," he assured his sister when she expressed concern about leaving him. "I'll come visit you and that wild cowboy husband of yours when the weather's good." True to his word, Rhett returned in late February. The reunion was sweet, with Sarah now walking unsteadily and calling clearly for Papa. When Rhett appeared, a development that brought tears to his eyes. By early April, everything was in place for their departure. Rebecca had sold or given away anything they couldn't take with them, keeping only the most precious items: Sarah's first blanket, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother, and the letters Rhett had written during their separation. The journey to Carson Valley took 4 days, traveling in the comfortable wagon Rhett had purchased specifically for the trip. Sarah, now a curious and active 14-month-old, treated the journey as a grand adventure, pointing excitedly at birds and animals along the way. The land Rhett had purchased exceeded Rebecca's expectations. 20 acres of gently rolling terrain with a clear stream running through it, bordered on one side by pine forest and opening to a view of the distant mountains on the other. He had already begun construction on a house, a solid 2-story structure that would have plenty of room for their family to grow. "It's perfect," Rebecca breathed as she stood on the spot that would soon be their front porch. "Absolutely perfect." Rhett wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kent." They lived in a temporary cabin on the property while the main house was completed, Rhett working alongside the hired builders every day. By summer, they had moved into their new home, with a proper kitchen for Rebecca, a nursery for Sarah, and room for the future they both envisioned. The years that followed brought all the joys and challenges they had hoped for. Rebecca established a small but profitable business selling preserves and baked goods to nearby ranches and the growing town. Rhett's cattle operation flourished, and he gained a reputation as a fair employer and honest businessman. Sarah grew into a spirited, intelligent child with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's love of the outdoors. She had no memory of a time when Rhett wasn't her father and showed no interest in the story of her biological father's death. So complete was her sense of belonging in the Kent family. When Sarah was 3, Rebecca gave birth to a son they named James Henry, a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and mother's quick smile. 2 years later, they welcomed twin girls, Emma and Mary, named for the family Rhett had lost and now found again in a new form. On the evening of the twins' first birthday, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Rebecca and Rhett sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "You ever think about that night in Verdi?" Rebecca asked, her head resting comfortably on Rhett's shoulder. "How different our lives might have been if you hadn't walked into that doctor's office." Rhett's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes, but I prefer to think it wasn't chance that brought us together. Some things are meant to be, no matter what path you take to get there." Rebecca smiled, thinking of the desperate young widow she had been and the strong, contented woman she had become. "I believe you're right," she said softly. "Some things are simply meant to be." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they remained on the porch, surrounded by the life they had built together, a life that had begun with a sick baby, an empty purse, and the unexpected kindness of a passing cowboy who decided to stay. Henry visited every summer, his joy in his nieces and nephews evident in the wooden toys he carved for them and the stories he told of their mother's childhood. Rebecca's business expanded to include a small shop in town, and Rhett's ranch grew to employ several hands who lived in cabins on the property. Years passed, the children grew, and the love that had begun in that doctor's office in Verdi deepened and matured like fine wine. There were difficult times, drought years when the cattle suffered, a scarlet fever outbreak that nearly claimed young James, the death of Henry in a mining accident when the children were teenagers. But through it all, Rebecca and Rhett faced life as they had from the beginning, together, with unwavering faith in each other. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their grown children arranged a celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. The original cabin where they had first lived on the property had been preserved and decorated with lanterns and flowers for the occasion. As twilight fell and music played, Rhett led Rebecca away from the festivities to the old cabin. Inside, he had recreated their first meal together, a simple stew, much like the one he had prepared on the trail from Verdi to Silver City. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said, presenting her with a small wooden box. Inside lay a delicate gold locket. When Rebecca opened it, she found 2 tiny portraits, one of Sarah as a baby, taken shortly after they had arrived in Carson Valley, and one of Rhett as he had looked when they first met. "To remember how it all began," he explained as he fastened the chain around her neck. Rebecca touched the locket gently, then reached up to cradle Rhett's face in her hands. His hair was silver now, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his gaze still held the same steady warmth that had comforted her on that desperate night so long ago. "I've never forgotten," she whispered. "Not for a single day." As they rejoined the celebration, watching their children dance and laugh in the glow of the lanterns, Rebecca felt a profound sense of gratitude. From the darkest night of her life had come the greatest blessing, a love that had healed old wounds, created new life, and built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all begun because a cowboy paid a doctor and stayed all night.